Good evening, everyone. As you can see, I am not Jason Miles. I'm your host for tonight, Paul Prescott, on another episode of This is Revolution. If you're new to the channel, please hit like and subscribe. And if you're enjoying what you see, make sure to hit the notifications bell as we are constantly adding new episodes, doing cross streams with other channels, and adding additional new programming like what you're going to see tonight. Also, before we start, there's some big news in the TIR camp. Jason is finally going to have his work published. His essay called I Was a Teenage Anarchist will be available next month in print from Everyday Analysis. And there have been talks brewing about a live intimate book launch in the Bay Area. So as soon as Jason has more details about that, we will post it. But for now, the link to his book is in the description and the show notes. So let's get right into it. Labor is having a moment right now in this country. We're living through an uptick of labor struggles and strikes in all kinds of sectors. Workers at Amazon and Starbucks are organizing. UPS workers almost went on strike. Writers and actors in Hollywood are on strike. Auto workers, of course, currently, and tomorrow, actually, the largest healthcare workers strike in U.S. history could possibly take place at Kaiser Hospital in California. And we're also seeing public support for labor unions at the highest it's been in decades, and the most friendly National Labor Relations Board, arguably, in generations. And of course, right now, the fight that is capturing people's imagination is the strike of the United Auto Workers at the big three auto companies, Ford, General Motors, and Stellantis, which was formerly known as Chrysler. So are we seeing the beginnings of a true labor revival in this country? Our guest tonight is Jack Rasmus, and recently wrote about the strike in the LA Progressive, asking the question if this is the end of concession bargaining in the United States. He wrote, the question is whether the UAW can begin the end of the two-tier system and pay gap and get a decent settlement that brings auto workers paltry $18 to $32 an hour pay into the 21st century. It remains to be seen. We may be witnessing the beginning of the end of concession bargaining that has, for 40 plus years, devastated American workers' wages and contributed greatly to the growing income inequality afflicting American workers. Emphasis here on the may. The UA strike is in this sense historic. So I'm excited to welcome to the show, Jack Rasmus.
Glad to join you.
Thanks for being here. If I was Jason, I would have the sound effects and the round of applause. But, secret to the audience, we do not have a live audience. So I guess first, you kind of start your piece, and there's been a lot in the news about the strategy of this strike, what is being called the stand-up strike strategy. So can you talk a little bit about that? What is the stand-up strike strategy? How does it compare to past UAW strikes? And, why do you say this is not necessarily as innovative as people are talking about in the media?
Yeah, well, the media is making a big deal of the fact that the UAW for the first time struck all three of the assembly companies. Well, they only struck one plant for a whole week of each. They call that the stand-up strike. I guess that's a play on words from the Great Strike of 37, the sit-down strike that formed the beginning of the United Auto Workers. That was quite an historic event, and it was successful. So successful that the Supreme Court quickly moved to make sit-down strikes illegal. So it was a very effective form of striking. And then the no sit down was codified there in the 1947 Taft-Hartley Act, which pretty much took a hammer to various forms of striking that were quite successful in the 30s and 40s, sympathy strikes and other kinds of strikes. And that made it illegal. And then they closed the final loophole with the Lyndon-Griffin Act of 59 on secondary boycotts. In other words, striking a company like the Teamsters would to support another union, refusing to handle their shipping as an act of solidarity. So there's a long history of imposing restrictions on the right to strike in this country. It goes back quite a long ways. Taft-Hartley required they called it a cooling off period where the government got involved and twisted arms. Any strike that has potential for national impact, Taft-Hartley can be invoked, and the government will step in. And whenever the government steps in, the government really isn't interested in helping anybody on the worker side. They just want to get a settlement as quick as they can. I've been in federal mediation sessions a number of times in my younger years when I was elected local president and negotiator. They just play games to try to get both sides somehow to come to a settlement. But the point is, there's a long history of strike limitations in this country. I just, touched the surface of this legislation, and then there's all kind of court decisions and all kind of NLRB decisions and arbitrators' decisions and so forth. I like that metaphor of Gulliver. That picture of Gulliver tied down with all the ropes and so forth. And the law, the legal system has labor Gulliver really tied down in a number of ways, and this system has been expanding ever since World War II in a number of ways, not just no strike, to really tie the hands and prevent the exercise of union power in strike situations. There's a whole history of that. In fact, in my play, my musical play, 1934, which is about the 1934 longshore strike, maritime strike, a general strike. I have a song called The Legal Web. So I won't go into the lyrics and so forth at this point, but the point is, once again, there's a long history of tying down labor. One of the ways they've really also tied down labor, and this is relevant to the UAW strike, is with concession bargaining. What is concession bargaining? Concession bargaining is where the unions give up what they already achieved in prior negotiations. You see, for most of the period from the late 30s, 40s, and up to the early 1970s, labor expanded. The unions expanded their contracts into a whole number of areas. They not only advanced benefits and wages and so forth, but they expand workers' rights and union rights in a number of ways in collective bargaining. They were quite successful. But that sort of begins coming to an end in the late 1970s, and the historical marker there that I believe begins concession bargaining on a general scale is the 1979 Chrysler strike, in which Jimmy Carter personally intervened, and with Doug Fraser, who later was given a seat on the board of GM. Chrysler was. They pretty much got the workers to settle and to give up a number of benefits and language in their contract. And that sort of set off what then became general concession bargaining, particularly manufacturing and construction, for a number of decades. And the question today is, can these concessions be stopped and reversed? That's what we're seeing. And there's some indication that that's the case, but it's still pretty much up in the air. Just to look back historically one more time, most workers and people don't realize about the greatest strike and successful strike wave in this country was in 1970-71, in which the construction trades, which had large regional contracts, set off the pattern of significant gains, and the Teamsters who delivered to construction sites then picked it up, and then manufacturing jumped in, and then longshore jumped in, and
the workers as well.
Yeah, they were quite successful, so successful, and I'm going to stop and make sure you understand how successful that strike wave, the biggest strike wave we ever had, by the way, in terms of total total members out on the street. The unions won 25% wage increases in the first year of a 3-year contract. 25% in the first year, 3-year contract. All those unions I mentioned. And they were so successful, the employers couldn't stop them. Richard Nixon had to step in and freeze wages, freeze the implementation of those contracts, and roll them back to 5.5%. In other words, the government had to come in on the side of the employer in a very blatant way and assist the employer and roll back. And then over the 1970s, it was, the big companies started planning, how can we stop this? How can we roll this back? The unions are too strong. Social movements were too aggressive in the 70s. And under Jimmy Carter, we see the formation of what was called the Business Council and the Business Roundtable for the first time. And they developed a strategy rolling back unions. And that strategy became part of neoliberal policies. In my book, The Scourge of Neoliberalism, I identify 4 major policy areas that define neoliberalism. And one of those is industrial policy. In other words, privatization and deregulation, but also compressing wages and destroying unions whenever they could in various ways. And there were various ways they began to do it under Reagan. The PATCO strike that is often referenced is just the tip of an iceberg of what went on in the 80s and after that. And make a long story short, they devastated the unions. The unions had like 22% of the workforce unionized in the private sector. And today, I think there's like 6 or 7% of the private sector workforce. And most of that is, public. Well, that's the private. Public workers are in addition to that. So it's like 10%, including public workers. But most of that's transport workers because you can't offshore transport, you see. And that was a big way. They offshored a lot of manufacturing, even some non-manufacturing. But you can't offshore public employment, and you can't offshore transport. And those are the only unions that really remained with some leverage and influence. And membership, but even there were ways of driving membership down, like passing competition acts and the Trucking Act, the Airline Act in 1980. The point is, we get 40 years of concession bargaining where unions are giving up not only rolling back wages and so forth and benefits, but also giving up important contract language. Workers' rights and union rights and expanding of management rights in turn. And that is part of neoliberal industrial policy for the last 43 years. And the question is, to bring it up to the present, are we seeing now the beginning of the end of that? Are the unions with some new leadership finally, and the fact that real wages have been so poorly grown over the years here. If you go back to 1982, if you look at the whole class and non-supervisory production service workers, their real wages adjusted for inflation are less than they were in 1982. And then you look at the auto workers. Why are the auto workers so adamant? Well, their real wages in the last 4 years have declined 19%. They've gone backwards 19% in 4 years only, not counting the years before that. During the same period, the CEOs of the big auto companies have seen their pay packages increased 40%. That's why when the union walked out, they say, well, you got 40%, we make the cars, so we're going to ask for 40% too. They're at 36 right now. When they walked out, they reduced it to 36, and the companies are at 20%, except in Canada.
Before we go into the specifics of the demands, just to go back to the stand-up strike a little bit, one thing I just want to raise, there does appear to be some interesting ways that the strategy appears to be successful on the one hand, we're seeing reports that the companies are kind of off guard. So they're anticipating one plant striking. They divert parts to other plants. That turns out that the plant they sent to was striking. I do think there's an interesting, from an organizer perspective, an element of escalation here. Whereas, if everyone went out strike at the beginning, right now the media wouldn't be saying anything about it. And I think for workers, it would kind of be dragging on. But I think there's an interesting element of every week now, it dominates a news cycle again. And there's sort of this perspective from workers that things are continuing to build and build, which I think could be helpful in a large strike. And you do mention in the article, there's an aspect of this of preserving the strike fund. I think it's something like 700 something million they have, which seems like a lot, but that's going to dry up very quickly. I think it's $500 a week for over 100,000 workers. So just before we move on to their demands, any thoughts on that? These other
that's an important topic. I have mixed feelings about that strategy that they call stand up. It's really a step-by-step escalation of the pressure on the companies here. First week, they only struck one plant each. I mean, that's nothing. That's a token move, and I don't think that convinces the companies in any way of let's get back to the table. And then, of course, they expanded it here to 38 plants, and they're focusing on Ford. Typically, the UAW used to do pattern bargaining, which was let's strike all of one company, get that negotiated, put the pressure. They're losing customers to the other two, and then we'll take that pattern and we'll use it for the other companies to settle on as well. I'm not so sure that that's the best tactic, step by step, and that's because I've been in many strikes myself, some of them very long, and there's a certain dynamic that occurs in the strike, and the tough point is 4 weeks. That's when the house and mortgage note and the rent and the car note and everything comes due. And that's when workers start feeling the pressure. And you want to get to the crunch point with the company as soon as you can, because time doesn't work on the side of the worker. Now, of course, the companies, they're losing business as well, but they got lots of ways of recouping through the tax system and with their suppliers, some of their losses. The workers don't have that, you see. And that four week point is an important point. 2 weeks is kind of another point of you better escalate at 2 weeks, which UAW has done, and 4 weeks. I think they're moving back to their traditional pattern bargaining, strike one company fully and hard, and bring them to a settlement, and then schedule it. So if that's what they're at now or next week when they escalate more, what did they really gain in 2-3 weeks of this step escalation? I don't know. So I'm not. I may be wrong. I may be. It may be that the parts suppliers can do their job, and the company will lay people off, and maybe they'll be able to get unemployment benefits at that time. Although it's hard to get unemployment benefits in a labor strike now, even if you get laid off. So I guess I'm more skeptical of whether the stand-up strike is really the right strategy. And in any event, I see them eventually moving to, by the 4-week mark, back to their old strategy of strike one company. In this case, it's Ford, and put all the pressure on that one company. If that's the case, did they lose some weeks and some time? Because time is of the essence, I don't know. We'll see. We'll see. And stand-up strike, maybe that's a new strategy that works. But my initial response was I was a little skeptical of that.
Mm-hmm. And so you started to a little bit go into, what are the actual demands UAW is fighting for? So could you go into that again and kind of maybe put it in the context of this concession bargaining that's been the trend for 4 decades? How do these
Yeah,
demands kind of
yeah,
match up and relate to
yeah.
that?
Well, two of the biggest concessions that need to be reversed in order to end concession bargaining. There are others, but two of them are you got to get rid of this two-tier system. I mean, this is just the way that the company manipulates its cost to reduce its cost of any settlement they eventually agree to. It's a way of pitting one group of workers against the other. There's lots of advantages to management with the two-tier system. That's got to end. Okay. We saw that as an issue as well in the Teamsters negotiations, and it's rampant across all of American labor management relations now because it's such an advantage for the companies. The Teamsters closed the gap, as I understand. The gap is the wage gap in the two-tier. You have a separate wage structure, different start rate, different top rate. Takes you longer to get to the top of the wage progression with seniority than the first wage structure for the older, more established workers. It's shorter to get to the top. The wages are higher. So the whole idea of getting rid of the two-tier, you can do it in steps. In other words, you can raise the minimum wage and start wage for the second tier, so it's the same as the first tier. You can reduce the amount of progression steps to get to the top. You can have the same top tier, or you can abolish it outright all at once, which is harder to do. But it seems like the Teamsters have made took a big bite out of the whole two-tier wage structure. We'll see whether the auto workers can do the same. I mean, their demand correctly when you go in is get rid of it. And there'll be probably some compromise. We'll see, what it is, but they've got to eliminate it. The problem is that now labor negotiations go 4 and 5 years. It takes you a long time to come back and complete whatever strategic objectives you have. It used to be in my day, 3 years was the most, and in many cases it was 1 or 2 years, and now it's 4 or 5 years. 5 years seems to be the average. The workers are at 4 years when they walked out. The companies are at, I think they're 4.5, or maybe the company's at 4.5. I think the settlement will be 5 years, and they'll throw more money into the pot in order to get the workers to buy a 5-year agreement. Cost of living adjustment. The auto workers, I think, gave that up in 2007 or 9 or something when they walked out. That's very important, as we see now. Inflation is just ravaging workers' real wages. And it's worse than it's reported by government labor department statistics. That's a whole other story of how they get to lowball the actual inflation. I write about that on my blog a lot, jackrasmus.com, if you want to see my arguments, how the inflation adjustment or the inflation numbers are really lowball. They're actually at least a couple percent higher than they're reporting. But anyway, inflation really devastates workers' wages. And UAW auto workers have gone back, and everyone's going back now in the last couple of years significantly. You needed, I would estimate, at least 10% initial wage raise to make up for 2022 alone, and then 2023. At the end of this, we're going to see probably. Well, the government says it's 3-4%, but it's really 5 or 6% right now. It looks like with gasoline prices going up and rents going up and certain processed food and insurances and utilities all going up, it's more than the 3-4% they're reporting. So you got to restore the COLA, the cost of living adjustment clause, as we said. That's extremely important. Those two markers, the COLA and the two-tier, have to be eliminated. And the third, I would say, union pensioners. Those folks have really taken it in the ear. And can you make some adjustment to take care of pensioners? Those three things, if the union makes some significant gains in those three areas, I would say it's taken a long step. towards ending concession bargaining. We'll see what the result is.
Yeah. And just one note on tiers, since you mentioned, my day job is actually I work on staff with Teamsters for a Democratic Union, the Reform Caucus, and the Teamsters. And just a note on that tier question, in 2018, two-tier was introduced at UPS among the drivers. And so, when the Teamsters were talking about two-tier, primarily they meant between the drivers, and that actually was totally eliminated in this contract immediately. Now, the other tier, if you want to call it a tier, is between part-timers and full-timers. I think there was a big step made on that, but the primary two-tier actually was eliminated. And I do think, why I think it's a little tougher, UAW has a little bit of a tougher fight, is it's more entrenched, it's been there longer, and my understanding is there's multiple levels of tiers. There's not just two. There's like, but it's, as you said, incredibly important to eliminate tiers and get those out of contracts.
Yeah, let me just comment on that. It's important because the company uses two-tier to reduce the initial package it agrees to. It could agree to a 25% wage package over 4 years or whatever. But if you got two-tier, then you've got the older workers retiring, and they hire new workers at a lower wage. So they're actually taking back some of the wages they agreed to initially. So, and that's why they like it so much.
Right.
There's other ways they can manipulate it, because usually the second tier has less rights in terms of seniority and promotions and so forth. So it's a stake in the heart of unions, and they got to remove that.
Yep, absolutely. To switch gears a little bit, I wanted to make sure to get this question in. There was a time in this country where union leaders were household names, even among people who weren't in unions. So, people like Walter Reuther, of course, the former UAW president, Jimmy Hoffa, not always for the best reasons, but Harry Bridges, John L. Lewis, in a more local sense in New York, people like Mike Quill. And I think we're kind of seeing the beginning of maybe a return of these kind of charismatic union leaders. So, during the UPS contract campaign towards the end, Sean O'Brien from the Teamsters made the rounds on TV. I personally think Sean Fain has been a very effective communicator. If you remember Mike Lynch from the rail workers in the UK going viral, and Sarah Nelson from the flight attendants. So, these leaders, I think, have been very effective communicators of the message to the American public, and especially in this moment where the public is on labor's side. So, what do you think of this development? Is that meaningful at all? Is it actually happening? Does it have any consequence that maybe these union leaders are becoming more prominent public figures again?
Well, it's a pretty low bar for the new leadership to jump over, and there is some indication that they are a better crop than some of those we had during the worst years of neoliberal industrial policy. Provenzano and the Teamsters, as you probably know, and some of the others, really, well, I'm not going to say, on air what I thought of some of these guys. they were really there to do the bidding of the companies. You got to realize too that since neoliberalism, the government has played even a more aggressive intervention role here than it did, before 1980. On the side of the employers, in most cases, we saw that in the railroad strike, right? Here's the railroad workers a year or so ago, all they wanted was some time off, paid time off, some sick time, because they only had like 1 or 2 days in their contract a year, personal leave that they could take when they're sick. And, the railroads coming out of COVID, they just didn't hire people back. They're running on a 70% workforce. So the existing workers had to work like hell, huge overtime and driving them, their health down, because that's what happens. And all they wanted was, 10, eventually it was like 10 paid leave days, which is just standard, in most union contracts, at least. The railroads wouldn't even give them that. And then you got the government stepping in and, Pelosi and Biden threatening anti-strike legislation. I mean, they didn't even bother to use the Railway Labor Act, which, like the Taft-Hartley Act, allows the government to impose. Well, I think they did have a freeze of sort. I take that back. But they just came down hard on the side of the employers. I mean, we hadn't seen anything like that in decades. Well, I can't even remember historically where the government stepped in since the Patco strike, maybe, right? On the side of the employers. The point is, labor leaders today have a tougher job, I think, because of the government intervention. And yet you still see so many of them who are trying to hide under the apron strings of the Democratic Party. I think that's a strategic problem of labor. Labor should be more independent politically. When you rely on a political party as much as some of the leaders in the past have, and it looks like there's a little bit of break there with O'Brien and Fain, maybe,
and that actually gets to, you kind of anticipating the next question. A move I thought was good on Fain's part. So far UAW leadership has refused to endorse Joe Biden because of Inflation Reduction Act, which is subsidizing, low-wage, non-union electric vehicles. Of course, Biden, this strike is now taking on political implications. Biden showing up to the picket line, Trump making comments, holding rallies. But again, so far, to be clear, UAW has been clear that they are not endorsing Biden unless they see a change. So what do you make of how this strike is becoming a kind of a political focal point?
Well, a lot of the auto plants are in those swing states, and that's what these two politicians see as important here. So that's why they're pandering of sorts to the auto workers. I don't see them doing much. Biden is sitting on billions. I don't know how many billions of direct subsidies for the auto companies to build their EV plants in the U.S. He could very easily, say, hey, I may not release this if you guys don't play fair here with your workers. By the way, just as an addendum to what's an indication of ending of concession bargaining. These EV plants for the auto workers are very important because the companies are going to use fewer workers in these plants. You just don't need all the parts for an electric vehicle. And the issue of job security for these auto workers is extremely important, along with the coal, along with the two-tier. This is a difficult fight for the union, and everybody should be supporting them because, if they can break through, the Teamsters got a foot in the door. If they can break through and end this two-tier stuff, that will be a very important landmark in the union movement here. The other that we may talk about is what's going on with the writers and the actors. We can talk about that in technology. That's also another historic struggle going on. Just like this is a historic strike for the auto workers. Not the strategy, the fact of the strike and the issues are historic.
Right. And I will come back to the writer's strike, but first, just to hone in on electric vehicle production, it's playing an interesting role. So, again, Fain and the UAW are saying these should be union jobs. They want to pressure Biden on that. But, I think a broader thing we all should take into account, it's not just a right-wing talking point that there is a risk to jobs here. And, I wrote an article of Jacobin based on an Economic Policy Institute study that kind of laid out that if we do not move production along the whole EV supply chains, the batteries, parts, and all that sort of thing, as well as the vehicles, it will result in a net job loss because it just takes fewer workers to build electric vehicles. So, you want to say more about just the overall economic dynamics of electric vehicle production, how this is going to affect workers, how the companies might be looking at this.
Yeah, well, it's part of what was improperly called the Inflation Reduction Act. These are the subsidies for alternative energy, and this is what part of the subsidies to the auto companies, actually bribes, build in the U.S. and we'll pay for part of your plant, right? Is really what that is about. And the government has leverage, but Biden's not really using it. Maybe later down the road he might, but he's certainly not using it right away. And I won't predict that he would. It's very important because it's part of changing technology. Can workers protect themselves and their wages and their jobs against the accelerating technological change that's going on? It's not just the EV plants, but it's Chat GPT and artificial intelligence, and this technology is escalating. It's accelerating, and there's a danger, a very big danger for new technologies and workers' jobs. Their very employment, notwithstanding their wages and their benefits. It's part of the historic fight, not only to end concession bargaining, but the future. This is all about the future we're seeing right now, and workers know in their gut that they better do something now, because the next 10 years, you could lose it all if you don't do something about it now.
Yeah, and you have an uncanny ability to anticipate all my next questions. But yeah, this question of, what used to be more so just referred to as automation, but now increasingly AI, is becoming a big issue in union contract negotiations. Of course, the Writers Guild and the actors, and we can talk about that in a second, but not just there. I mean, UPS is starting to try to build totally automated centers. One of the things won in the 2023 contract was UPS has to at least, any sort of automation change cannot happen without the union approving it, and they have to meet, and there's guidelines. We just had the issue, Gavin Newsom in California vetoing a bill that the Teamsters were supporting and pressuring him on, to mandate a person on a truck with over, I think, 10,000, I forget the exact figure, but a truck of a certain weight. So this is playing out everywhere. And I think some of these demands that actually are not new demands are getting revived. So, I mean, leaders like Harry Von Arsdale from the electrical workers, in the 50s and 60s was pushing for a 32-hour work week. Leaders like A. Philip Randolph, Bayard Rustin were sounding the alarm about what is automation going to do to Black workers in inner cities. Sean Fain has put the demand for a 32-hour work week on the table as well. So yeah, do you want to talk about, how do you see this playing out in different industries? And we can talk about the Writers Guild strike. What is in store for unions and AI, and how is this going to affect bargaining in the future?
Well, I would begin by saying, just go and read Goldman Sachs research. The bank, Goldman Sachs, right, put out a study here, I think it was last year, where they predicted artificial intelligence will eliminate or reduce hours for 130 million workers. 130 million. Majority of those will be in the U.S. and in Europe, right, in Japan. That's a lot of jobs, right? How is this going to happen? And don't even use the word automation anymore, because automation, conjures up the idea of robots, right? And somehow these physical devices are going to take our jobs. No, it's software. It's all about AI is software. It's software machines. And the whole essence of artificial intelligence is to eliminate simple decision-making jobs, whether it's simple decision on an assembly line, or whether it's simple decision in a retail store, or in a service sector, customer service reps, or backroom accountants, or whatever. Simple decision-making jobs will be eliminated now, and we see that proven by the latest introduction or advance in AI called Chat GPT, GPT-4, whatever, which is just the beginning. Natural language processing, and these quote software machines will talk to us, and they'll sound just like a human being. And that's a big question for the writers, as they knew it. The writers knew, well, if they can write, if these software machines using natural language can write scripts or review scripts and or amend scripts, well, what's the role for the writer, right? And the whole thing about AI is it's based on a massive database of information. Well, where are they going to get the information from scripts? Well, from the scripts written by the writers, right? So they're going to use what they've written to take the jobs away, and they know it. I can't speak enough about the dangers of AI in terms of job destruction. I had a radio show not far back, and I am writing an article myself called Artificial Intelligence versus the Working Class. We're looking at a very serious situation that's moving very fast, and by 2030, we'll really be here. In the trucking industry, it's technology, sensor technology, and the driverless cars and trucks. There's a million local truck drivers in this country, but a lot of these local trucks, truck distribution is going to be driverless, or it's going to be okay. You may have somebody sitting in the UPS truck, right? But they won't be driving it, and therefore they'll pay you a lesser wage. That's how they will get the camel's nose under the tent. You see, there's so many ways that it's a big threat. AI is a big threat, and the fundamental thing is eliminating simple decision-making jobs and natural language, whether it's written, in the case of the writers, or spoken in the case of the actors. A lot of voiceover acting, and even some of the new animated, created actors. They won't need you'll license you're an actor, and maybe you're James Earl Jones or something, and you'll license your voice, and they'll just use your voice.
And of course, with
so many ways that it's going to penetrate, and the writers know it, and the actors know it too, and they're fighting a valiant strike. I don't think they have even any strike benefits. I may be wrong on that, but the writers stayed out for 4 months. That's heroic, 4-month strike.
And of course, with the actors, for the extras, the companies want to just get your image, you act one time, get paid once,
right.
use it. I used to be a teacher before my current job, and I can just say I'm glad I don't have to deal with Chat GPT and the effects, in the classroom and in education. And as kind of a follow-up question to what we were just talking about, does this for you point to the need? Yes, you can take this issue on in bargaining around artificial intelligence in different ways. But does this point to a need for the unions to turn to a political solution? Things like a legislated shorter work week or shorter day, can it really be addressed ultimately at the level of collective bargaining?
That's a very good question. It's such a difficult issue. I'm not sure that it can be. Maybe the strongest unions might be able to blunt it and get a voice, a veto and a voice maybe over some of this. But yes, I think it needs to be a political solution. The problem is there's so much money being made and to be made with AI. That train has left the station, and the politicians aren't even going to try and stop it. And all this conferences about ethics and AI, that's just window dressing. Nothing's going to happen there, and it's very dangerous. It's going to have even a greater impact than the whole shift that occurred under neoliberalism to temporary and part-time work and gig work. That destroyed a lot of good jobs or created low-pay jobs, in contingent jobs. We got like 50 million people who are part-time temp gig workers in this country out of 160 million labor force. That's huge. And that's played a big role in driving down wage compression over the years. And I think this whole AI thing is going to dwarf the impact of that whole contingent worker, gig worker problem.
And I think a good question maybe to end on, as someone that is involved in the labor movement and loves the labor movement, I am, of course, excited by the activity we've seen these last few years. But I've also always been stressing to people to be cautious before declaring, this is the next great labor upsurge. This is it. I think in reality, we just don't know yet where this will go. One sobering fact I point out to people is you could add up all the Starbucks workers who have organized so far, and it wouldn't amount to as many workers in a big Amazon plant or a big UPS facility, which of course is not an argument not to support them. And of course, we do see stuff happening at UPS and Amazon, but it's just something. Sometimes a story like that can get out in the media and seem like it's a bigger impact than it might have. So for you, I mean, what would you be looking for in these next few years in the labor movement to see that we actually really are on this? What would have to happen for you to kind of conclude we actually are moving into a different period, a moment where labor is really coming back in a meaningful way?
I think labor needs significant changes in its strategy. The whole form of struggle is well, let's negotiate contracts here and do it. Every 4 or 5 years, and we're in these stovepipes. I mean, Teamsters are here, and auto workers are here, and so forth. We're in these stovepipes, and that worked in the 30s and 40s when you had industrial and you weren't globalized markets. I think now, and I wrote about this some years ago, that somehow we have to find a new form of organization. Not where we use it to replace the old. No, the current has to continue the way it is. But there's got to be a new form of union organization, maybe on a regional basis, and using local committees on of various members from various unions to build solidarity and to assist each other and bring in the community on when there are strikes, when there are boycotts for political action and so forth. Somehow we need a structure where unions aren't going after this, individual union by individual union. Somehow the force of the class and solidarity has to be built somehow. Or an organization. It's an organization question, I think, is the real question, because we can't go after this. Maybe the strongest unions like UPS or the Kaiser workers or something can slow it down and can even make some gains, break through this concession bargaining. But what happens to the rest? I mean, the best and strongest unions, even with better leadership, you're still only talking about 3-4% of the labor force, right? You really got to somehow bring all of it together, all the union workers together. And the AFL-CIO, that's just the talk shop, at the top. That's the talk shop where the individual unions get together and, talk about how much money they're going to give to the Democrats. My point is, it's an organization question. We have to see a new kind of organization that, somehow brings more solidarity and joint action of union workers and non-union workers and community. We hear a lot about the Community Labor Alliance, but what's the form for that? It can't be one where, okay, union's on strike. We want to help you. We want your community leaders to help us with a boycott, or it can't be, well, we'll come and march, unions will come and march with you when you have an issue over housing. It's got to be something more effective. And the question is organization. That's the number one question. What new form of organization? Just like politically, the question, it's an organization question. We can't be, labor cannot continue to rely on these two wings of the corporate party of America And that's what the Democrats and Republicans are. One throws you a few more crumbs, but when the time is ripe, they play a role in taking it back. And we saw that under Obama. Obama comes out in 2008-9, 787 billion, in the recovery program, and then in 2011, $1 trillion in taking back programs, program cuts, right? And then he passes $5 trillion for another 10 years of the Bush tax cuts. Well, we're seeing the same thing with Biden here. We got $4 trillion that was spent on COVID and so forth. And then he gives the Build Back Better program, the Deep Six. It takes $1.65 trillion and he gives it to businesses and the subsidies in these three acts, the Infrastructure Act, the CHIP Act, and the Inflation Reduction Act. So, and there's going to be big austerity coming here, soon, as we see in Congress. So it's an organization question politically. It's an organization question in terms of the union and unions at the economic level. We need a new kind of organization, not where you throw the old out for the new, but an overlay on top of the old, because we're not going to give up collective bargaining, right? And we're not going to give up contracts. Anyone who says that is, dreaming, a nightmare, in fact. But we've got to have something that brings workers and union workers and non-union workers together to have one voice, so that, their influence is greater than it has been. We're fragmented, we're atomized, and that's a road to nowhere.
Mm-hmm. All right. Well, on the next episode, Jack will solve the organization question. But thank you so much for joining us tonight. And I have to say, I was today years old when I learned that you have a musical. So I think one episode you should perform that musical on This is Revolution. But thank you so much for speaking with us.
Well, actually, I'm in some discussions with the ILWU. We're talking about maybe putting up the play as a benefit for the actors union in LA.
Okay.
We'll see where that goes.
Kind of like a Pins and Needles revival.
Oh, much better. Much better.
Okay.
It's all original New Labor song.
Okay. Well, definitely let me know if that happens. So remember to like and subscribe. Keep your eyes peeled for Jason's new work coming out and a possible book event. Thank you again, Jack, for joining us. And we are out.